The Wish Carvers.
Written by Kathleen Gauer, illustrated by Sari, Richter, and narrated by Peartree. Day after day, week after week, month after month, Faye and her brother Eddie carved and painted. They sold their carvings at the village market every Saturday. The two earned enough to buy food to eat, clothes to wear, and more paint for their carvings. But sometimes all that work was exhausting. Every day they complained about the same things. "My hands are so sore from all this carving," Faye grumbled. "I wish I could take a long rest." "All my clothes are covered in paint," Eddie whined. "I wish I had something nicer to wear." One Saturday afternoon, while strolling home from the market, Faye and Eddie discovered an old carving knife by the roadside. When they brought it back to their cabin, they spotted some words carved on the handle. They read them out loud. "What's carved with me will come to be." "Do you suppose that's true?" Eddie asked. "Let's find out," Faye said. She carved a miniature wooden pot of gold. Eddie painted it, and they waited. Nothing happened. Then Eddie read the words on the knife out loud. "What's carved with me will come to be." Ever so slowly, the wooden pot of gold turned into a real, full-sized pot of gold. "It worked!" Faye shouted. "We can carve anything we wish for." "Woohoo!" Eddie exclaimed. "Let's try something bigger." Faye scratched her head. I know. I'll carve us living in a large stone cottage. Then you can paint it." As Faye carved away and Eddie painted, they chanted, "What's carved with me will come to be." By sundown, they had crafted their cottage. It was so perfect. Faye was positive she saw a light flicker in one of its windows. She quickly set the carving by their bedroom door and hopped into bed. The next morning, Faye and Eddie awoke to find themselves inside a huge stone cottage. "Yippee!" Eddie squealed. "The magic worked!" But when Faye and Eddie crawled out of bed, they discovered their pot of gold had disappeared, and there was more work to do than ever. There was more house to be cleaned, more garden to tend, and more firewood to be chopped. Soon Faye's hands were sorer than ever, and Eddie's clothes were dirtier than ever. "This place is much too big," Eddie moaned. "How can we ever keep up with all this work?" Faye said. "I know. I'll carve us living as king and queen in a lovely fairy tale castle with castle helpers to do all this extra work for us." "Good idea," Eddie said. "At least we won't have to work so hard." Again Faye carved away, Eddie painted, and together they chanted, "What's carved with me will come to be." By day's end, they had created their castle. It was so realistic, Faye was convinced she saw one of its towers sparkle. She stood the carving up against their bedroom door and climbed into bed. Just before sunrise, clatter, clatter, swish, swish, chop, chop. Faye and Eddie awoke to find themselves inside a giant fairy tale castle with many castle helpers cleaning, gardening, and chopping firewood. "Sounds like our castle helpers are already busy," Faye said. "I guess we'd better get to work too," Eddie sighed. Faye and Eddie were barely out of bed and dressed when tourists started lining up to tour their beautiful castle. "How will we ever cope with all these people?" Eddie asked. "We're used to such a peaceful life." "And now we'll have no time to carve and paint," Faye grumbled. And then, chatter, chatter, squish, squish, slop, slop. Tourists began to pour in by the hundreds. Muddy footprints covered the floors. Pictures were knocked off the walls, and when the tourists left, they left all their trash behind. "This castle is a royal mess," Faye groaned. "Now even our castle helpers are exhausted and grumbling about all the hard work." "I wish we still lived in our tiny log cabin," Eddie whined. Faye said. "I have an idea." One more time Faye carved away, Eddie painted, and together they chanted, "What's carved with me will come to be." That evening, Faye placed the freshly painted log cabin by their bedroom door. Then she tossed the magic knife out the window and slid into bed. Early the next morning, Faye and Eddie awoke to find themselves back inside their tiny log cabin. Fortunately, they still had the money from selling their carvings at the village market. It was enough to buy food to eat, clothes to wear, and more paint for their carvings. "I can't wait to get back to work," Faye said. She reached for her trusty old carving knife. Eddie pulled on his comfy old painting clothes. "I can't wait to get started." Then he scurried off to fetch his brushes and paint. Thank you so much for joining me in today's story, The Wish Carvers, written by Kathleen Gauer and illustrated by Sari, Richter. I had a really great time narrating this for you, and I hope to see you back for more next time. Happy readings!